Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle one of the world's most complicated and enduring conflicts. And to really get what's happening in the headlines today, we have to go back, way back, over a century. So, look at this number, 1.9 million. That's the staggering human cost of just the latest chapter of this conflict. As of early 2025, that's how many people have been forced from their homes in Gaza. But this isn't just a number on a screen. It's a painful reminder of tensions that have been building and boiling over for more than 100 years.
So the big question is, how did we even get here? To really understand what's happening right now, we've got to go back. Let's trace the key moments, the turning points that set the stage for today.
Okay, so Section 1, a century of tension. Look, the roots of this conflict go way deeper than the last few years, or even the last few decades. We're talking about a story that started over 100 years ago, when two different groups, two powerful nationalist movements, wanted the exact same piece of land. So let's set the scene. It's the late 1800s. Old empires are starting to fade, and these new ideas of nationhood are popping up everywhere. In Europe, you have the rise of Zionism, this political movement to establish a Jewish state in their ancestral homeland. And at the very same time, in the very same region, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire, you have the rise of Arab nationalism. So right from the get-go, you have two peoples with incredibly deep roots and claims to the same land on a collision course. And this timeline here, it really shows how things started to heat up. You have the first Jewish settlers arriving, then a huge moment in 1917, the Balfour Declaration. Britain basically promises its support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This gives the Zionist movement a massive international boost. Then, under British rule, the Mandate period, Jewish immigration really takes off. And with more people arriving, tensions with the local Arab population just kept growing, leading to clashes and eventually a full-blown Arab revolt in the late 30s. Things got so bad that the newly formed United Nations had to step in with a pretty drastic plan. And that UN plan, wow, was it a turning point. The idea was to split Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jewish leaders accepted it. For them, it was the chance they'd been waiting for. But Arab leaders rejected it completely. They saw it as an outside power unfairly carving up their land. And this wasn't just some political disagreement. Nope, this decision immediately kicked off a civil war. All right, Section 2, Wars and Uprisings. Because that civil war, that was just the opening act. It snowballed into a series of major wars that literally redrew the map and set the terms of this fight for decades. So, 1948, the British leave and Israel declares its independence. The surrounding Arab nations invade, and the first Arab-Israeli war begins. Israel wins, but for the Palestinians, the outcome is devastating. More than 700,000 of them either fled or were forced from their homes. This event is known as the Nakba, which means the catastrophe in Arabic. And it's not just a historical event. It created a refugee crisis that's still unresolved today and is absolutely central to Palestinian identity. Then, you have 1967, the Six-Day War. This was an absolute game changer. In just 6 days, Israel captures the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Gaza Strip from Egypt, and other territories too. And this is the moment the Israeli military occupation of Palestinian territories begins. An occupation that, continues to this day and has been at the very heart of pretty much every peace talk since. So for years and years, Palestinians are living under this military rule. And that frustration, it just builds and builds until it finally explodes. This leads to two major uprisings, known as the intifadas. It's an Arabic word that means shaking off. And that's really what they were. A mass movement to shake off the occupation. Now, the two intifadas were very different. The first one in the late 80s was mostly civil disobedience, protests, strikes. It really put the Palestinian cause on the world stage and, believe it or not, actually created the pressure that led to peace talks. But the second intifada, that was a different story. It kicked off after peace talks failed in 2000 and was so much more violent. It just shattered any hope that was left and created this deep, deep bitterness that you can still feel today. But it's not all just war and violence. Amid all that darkness, there were these incredible glimmers of hope. Let's talk about the search for peace. Because after that first intifada, there was this real push for a diplomatic solution. And for a little while there in the 90s, it honestly felt like peace might actually happen. And this brings us to the Oslo Accords in 1993. This was a huge deal. You had the Israeli prime minister and the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, two men who were lifelong enemies, shaking hands on the White House lawn. The whole idea was to create a path to Palestinian self-rule and figure out all the really tough final status issues down the line. The optimism at that moment, it was off the charts. People really thought, this is it, it's ending.
But that hope, it didn't last. In 1995, Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli extremist who was against the peace deal. That was a body blow. Add to that continued violence from Palestinian groups who also rejected the deal. And then the final nail in the coffin was the failure of the Camp David talks in 2000. They just couldn't agree on the big issues, and the whole thing just fell apart, collapsing right into the Second Intifada. So why? Why is this so hard to solve? That's what we're getting into in Section 4, the core disputes. It really all comes down to a few key issues, these massive roadblocks that are just incredibly emotional and politically explosive. Okay, so these are the big ones. Israeli settlements, the status of Jerusalem, Palestinian refugees, and of course, borders and security. And these aren't just bullet points on a slide. They cut to the very core of identity, history, and belief for both Israelis and Palestinians. Let's break down why each one is such a massive hurdle. First up, settlements. Since 1967, hundreds of thousands of Israeli civilians have built communities in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. For Palestinians, this carves up the land they see as their future state, making a single connected country almost impossible. Now, the international community overwhelmingly considers these settlements illegal. Israel disagrees, and construction has continued. Then there's Jerusalem. This city, it's holy to three major world religions. Both sides claim it as their capital. Israel sees a complete and united Jerusalem as its capital. Palestinians want East Jerusalem to be the capital of their future state. You can imagine why this is maybe the single most sensitive issue of them all. And the right of return. This is a huge one for Palestinians. It's the idea that the refugees from 1948 and 1967 and all their descendants, millions of people now, have a right to go back to their family homes. They see this as a right guaranteed by international law. But for Israel, allowing millions of Palestinians to return would mean Jews would no longer be the majority, which they argue would mean the end of Israel as a Jewish state. So you can see, these positions are pretty far apart. And because they haven't been able to solve these core problems, we're just stuck in this awful cycle of stalemate and violence. And that brings us to our final section, an unresolved future. Because right now, a real solution feels farther away than ever. For the longest time, the main idea on the table was the two-state solution, Israel and an independent Palestine, side by side. But look at this chart. Support for that idea has been dropping on both sides. A lot of Palestinians just don't believe it will ever happen, and a lot of Israelis worry about what that new state would mean for their security. So when you see what's happening today, it is so important to remember this isn't new. It's just the latest, painful chapter in this very long story. A story about two national movements, about war, about occupation, and about all the failed attempts at peace. The fundamental questions of land, of freedom, of security, they're the exact same ones they were fighting over decades ago. Look, getting a handle on this history is absolutely the first step, but it doesn't give us any easy answers, does it? It just shows you how incredibly difficult this all is. And it leaves us with the biggest question of all. After a century of struggle, what on earth is it going to take to finally break this cycle and find a lasting, just peace for everyone?